Hello everyone. So we just finished talking about Module 4.1, which was all just about consciousness and the different types. Now we're going to go into a little bit more detail into a state of consciousness known as sleeping or dreaming. So we're going to talk about more about what sleep is, why we need it, what dreaming is, why we need that, and then various sleep disorders that some individuals may suffer from. So what exactly is sleep? Well, sleep has to do with something known as our circadian rhythm. And our circadian rhythm is the 24 hours, roughly speaking, fluctuation from high to low points during certain bodily functions and behaviors. Essentially what that means is we have a period in our day when we're more awake, a period in our day where we're more kind of tired and asleep. And then roughly speaking, that makes up about 24 hours. The reason why it's called circadian rhythm is it comes from circadian, which means around a day. Dian meaning day and circa meaning around. So it's around a day long because unfortunately a day, mathematically speaking, is not exactly 24 hours. That's why every 4 years we have a leap year. It's to make up for that time. But that's what we mean when we say a circadian rhythm. It's this fluctuation, and our body kind of knows, okay, we've been awake for this amount of time, we need this amount of time for sleeping now. And so that's why towards the end of the day, we start to feel tired, roughly speaking. And this is also due to something known as your suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN. And this is a small part in the brain, in the hypothalamus, which essentially alerts the body into like, okay, it's time to feel sleepy now. Like, it keeps the circadian rhythm going in that nice equal 24-hour cycle. And so it tells the rest of the body, like it controls the timing, it controls our biological clock, as it were, and then it helps the body know, okay, now it's time to start secreting melatonin. And you might remember this because we've talked about this in a previous chapter, but melatonin is this natural chemical in our body that helps us feel sleepy and kind of put us to sleep. And so as we get closer and closer to, what your body sees as, time to go to bed, that melatonin increases and we start to feel tired. But that's what we mean by circadian rhythm, and then it's controlled again by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which I know is a big mouthful, but it's also known as the SCN. So things that can affect our biological clock and can affect, when we feel sleepy and when we feel awake have to do with things such as jet lag and shift work. Jet lag being that you go to a place that has a different time zone. Because obviously the sun can't be up shining, every single place at the same time. So when it's, 5 o'clock here, it might be 3 o'clock somewhere else, or midnight, or 1 o'clock. These are the different, I'm blanking on the word, give me a moment, the different time zones. There we go. So you can experience jet lag when you go to a different time zone, because what's happening is your biological clock, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, is saying, hey, it's 8 o'clock at night, time to get sleepy, time to pump out that melatonin, when it's actually like 3 o'clock in the afternoon where you are. Another thing that happens is shift work. This means that, let's say you usually work a 9 to 5 day job, and then all of a sudden you start working the night shift. Your body, again, like saying like, oh, it's time to go to bed, it's, 6, 7 o'clock, you've been home for a few hours. Oh, wait, no, actually, now you have to start working. Like, it confuses the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is also why sometimes Mondays can be so hard for people. Because a lot of times what happens is, you tend to sleep deprive yourselves, especially teenagers, during the weekday because you're staying up late, you want to talk to your friends, you want to play some video games, you want to have some fun, you got a lot of homework to do. So you go to bed really, really late, but then you have to get up really, really early in the morning to make it to school. Then finally the weekend comes around, you're like, oh, finally I can sleep in. And you sleep in really, really late. Let's say you get up at like 11, 12 o'clock. So what's happening is your suprachiasmatic nucleus is adjusting to it. And it's saying, oh, okay, now we wake up around 12, and so we don't get sleepy until like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And so that's why Monday can be such a shock to people. So it might sound bizarre, but the best thing that you want to do to feel the most awake is to keep a regular sleep schedule. Because things like jet lag and shift work can cause difficulties with sleeping, and it can also reduce alertness during periods of wakefulness. Because again, your suprachiasmatic nucleus might be having your body secrete melatonin and make you feel sleepy during a time when you're not supposed to. So when we talk about sleep, a lot of people think, oh, you're either awake or you're asleep. Doesn't quite work like that. In fact, there's many, many, many different stages of sleep. But before we break down all those stages, there's kind of two main parts. There's something known as NREM and then REM sleep. When we talk about NREM, this is when your body is like really slowing down. Your breathing gets really slow, your heart rate gets slow, your blood pressure, body temperature, all of that is at the 24-hour lowest point. It's when everything is slowing down. And if you recall in previous chapters, this is when we were talking about the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest. So this is that resting part. And that's where about kind of 4 of the stages of sleep take place in this NREM. But then we have REM sleep, which stands for rapid eyelid movement. And if REM sleep stands for rapid eyelid movement, what NREM stands for is non-REM sleep, or not rapid eyelid movement. So you'll never guess what happens during that sleep. You'll see that people in REM and also animals, if you watch them when they're sleeping, you'll see that their eyelids or their eyes are moving back and forth very rapidly underneath their eyelids. Most people don't witness this because usually you're not sitting there watching people while they're asleep. Hopefully not. But you can also see it in animals when they're sleeping as well. They start twitching and you see their eyelids going back and forth behind their eyelids. This is also when your body, in a sense, paralyzes itself. And these are the non-crucial muscles, I should say, that are paralyzed. Like your heart is perfectly fine, your heart's still going, your lungs are still going. It's more like the muscles in your arm. And the idea for this is that you're not like acting out your sleep and moving around when you're dreaming about things. Because in REM sleep is also where most, not all, but most dreams occur. And also the more vivid dreams. So again, you don't want to be acting out those dreams in your sleep, so your body actually becomes paralyzed. Other things, this is when there's a more faster, irregular heart and respiratory rates, because again, you're in these vivid dreams. It's like you're there, so it feels real and your body is responding as if you're there, except that you don't move because of that paralysis. You also see increased brain activity. We're going to get into that very, very shortly. So when we're talking about the brainwave activity, this goes back, again, to the chapter when we were talking about how we learn about the brain. All of this comes from EEG reports, so it's looking at brainwave activity. And so, when we are fully awake, we have what's known as beta waves, which kind of look like this. And so they're fast, low-amplitude waves, and those are beta waves. And those are the kind of waves we see when we're fully awake, going back to what we talked about in the first module. This is our focused awareness. We're fully awake, fully alert. We're awake. When we're kind of in a relaxed state, so this can be more that divided or more drifting alertness or consciousness, we're in this relaxed wakefulness where it goes from beta waves to alpha waves. So you'll see the waves look a little bit different, a little closer together. Then we start going into that first stage of sleep where we have these small irregular brain waves. And I should be saying that as you're going down through these stages of sleep, you're becoming less and less aware, less and less conscious. But especially in these 2 stages, you're still very much aware of your surroundings. This is why there's so many people that, fall asleep at the wheel and get themselves seriously hurt, if not killed. Because a lot of times they're like, I see everything around me, I see the cars, I'm still awake. But in actuality, they're in like the first stage of sleep, or in a very, very relaxed wakefulness. And as we mentioned, this is when your alertness is much lower, your response time is much lower. And so because of this, you can get seriously injured if you're doing certain things when you're in that first stage or that relaxed wakefulness. The next stage is the second stage of sleep. And as you can see, the wavelengths of the sleep are starting to get the amplitudes getting a bit bigger, the frequency a bit slower. This is when you also see what's known as these sleep spindles, which are these kind of random wavelengths in the EEG readings. And what's so interesting is we still, as of now, don't know exactly why they happen. We just know that they do happen. One of the thoughts out there is it's kind of like the brain rebooting itself to make sure that everything's on the same page, and that's why you kind of see that kind of reset. But we're still not known for sure. And then we get into stages 3 and 4. And 3 and 4 are very similar. It's when you see the delta waves, which are these even longer amplitudes. And the only difference between stages 3 and 4 is that in stages 3 there's less than 50% delta waves, and then in stage 4 it's more than 50%, so the majority are delta waves. And this is the kind of slowest waves that you see, the largest waves that you see. This is also, in a sense, the deepest level of sleep, but it's not the last stage of sleep. A lot of people think that when you're sleeping and then where most dreaming occurs is when you're the most knocked out, and that's not true. In the third and fourth stage of sleep, you're the hardest to wake up though. So if you've ever had someone or a pet and they're asleep and you try to push them awake and there is no waking them up, chances are they're in stage 4. But then, as I mentioned, all of these stages, stages 4, 3, 2, and 1, are all those NREM stages. But the last stage, the kind of 5th stage, is then REM sleep. And what's so interesting about this is when you look at those wavelengths, they're identical to the ones when you're awake. So they go all the way back to almost, very similar to ordinary wakefulness, where you are very aware, very alert, but you're asleep. And this is where most dreaming occurs, the kind of more vivid dreaming occurs in that REM sleep. So that might sound really weird that, the sleeping level, the majority of sleeping level is so similar to being awake, but it makes more sense when we look at just how sleeping occurs throughout the average 7 to 8 hour long sleeping cycle. Because it's not just that you're awake and then you go into a deeper and deeper level of sleep and then you dream. It's not quite like that. What happens is, you're awake, so before even stage 1 of sleep, and then over time you go into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, so into that deeper and deeper. But what you'll see is then, after about 45 minutes, again if you get a regular 7 to 8 hours of sleep, you'll see that you start to come out of the deepest level, so stage 3, stage 2, and then in this red area is when you go into REM sleep. So you're almost coming out of sleep, you're almost awake, but instead you go into this REM sleep. Then you spend a little bit of time in the REM, and then you go back into a deeper sleep. You spend some time there, you come out of it again, and then you spend a little bit more time. And what you see in this diagram is you spend less and less time in those deeper levels of sleep, and more time in REM sleep. Until then finally you're kind of in REM sleep, and then you come fully out of it into being awake again. So some things to take away from this is that the deepest level of sleep is not when you dream. The deepest level of sleep is that, again, stages 3 and 4, whereas when you're almost identical, at least as far as the EEG reading is concerned, your brain waves are concerned, where most dreaming occurs is in that level. It's kind of the lightest level of sleep is where most dreaming occurs. And so why do we sleep? This is a big question, because it's obviously something important. We spend, about, a fourth of our life sleeping? Yeah, a fourth of our life. If you get, the average of 8 hours of sleep a night, that's a fourth of our life. That's many, many years of our life in total being spent sleeping. So obviously it's important. And there's some theories as to why we sleep. The first one is that it's a protective function. And so when you're sleeping, you're not getting up and moving around. You're staying in a safe environment the majority of the time. So one of the theories is that it's just a protective function. And this is one of the ideas going back kind of evolutionarily speaking, when we were in tribes and, we were out amongst, various predators that could come and get us. And so by sleeping, we were staying put. It made it less likely for us to be out and about when predators, like lions and tigers and bears and stuff like that were out hunting at night. It's also one of those ideas as to why we are awake during the day and sleep at night, whereas a lot of predators, like lions and tigers and all of that, are nocturnal and they're awake at night and they kind of rest and sleep more during the day. The idea is that the predators got to pick. They were at the top of the food chain, they got to pick when they were going to sleep, when they were going to be awake and hunting. And it makes more sense to hunt and stuff at night when it's cooler, and then sleep during the day when, it's really bright out and there's the sun and all that, and you just want to rest and relax, and spend less energy. So the predators got that. So then the prey, such as us, we did the opposite, because then we were, out and asleep, not out and about, and we were just knocked out and asleep when those predators were hunting around, so it made it less likely for them to find us and capture us and kill us and eat us. Another idea is that it conserves energy. So this is, very similar to what we were just saying. The predators got to pick, but, some of the time, like, our body needs to recover. We spend energy just by walking, breathing, moving around. And so when we're asleep, it was shown, that's when our body is, that parasympathetic nervous system. It's the rest and digest. It's when our temperature is lowering, we're not spending as much energy, to have our heart pumping and, breathing and all of that. So our body needs that break. So that's one of the other ideas. And then it restores us. So we find that our brain needs some time to rest and restore itself. If you go days without sleeping, you can really feel it mentally. Not only physically, but mentally as well. Your brain needs that time to kind of recharge itself. And then in a similar note, it consolidates memories. So it's found, and this is one of those kind of tips and tricks for studying for an exam, if you want to remember something, look over it right before you go to bed. And then as soon as you wake up, go over it again. Because the idea is, what you're thinking about right before you go to bed seems to be something that your brain sees as very important, and so it goes over that memory as you're sleeping, and you actually recall it a lot better the next day. So memory consolidation, when we're asleep, it seems like our brain, one of the theories is our brain is going through all of the different thoughts and feelings and everything we had throughout the day and figuring out, okay, this is something we thought about a lot, it's something we need to remember. Oh, this we just barely thought about, it was, in the back of our mind, we don't need to remember that. So it's consolidating memories is that last theory as to why we sleep. And so this just kind of goes over it again, all of the different types. When you're wakefulness, you have those beta waves, and then when you're relaxed, it goes to alpha waves. Then we have stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. So stage 1 has those irregular brain waves, stage 2 has those sleep spindles, stage 3 and 4 is those delta waves, and then stage 5, or kind of REM, is then when you have that very, almost identical brain wave to being awake, and that's where most vivid dreaming occurs. So we talked about sleep and why we sleep, but what about dreams? Because as you saw in that diagram, we start to spend more and more time in REM sleep as, the night goes by, and that's where most vivid dreaming occurs. But why? Why do we have those vivid dreams in the first place? And there's various psychological perspectives that try to explain this. And the first one is Freud, which, as you recall, is a psychodynamic perspective that has to focus on unconscious minds, or the unconscious mind and unconscious thoughts. And the whole idea is that dreams carry hidden meaning and functions to satisfy those unconscious sexual and aggressive desires. So Freud believed that, we had these thoughts in our unconscious mind, and we're going to talk about this more in a later chapter, but we had these thoughts in our unconscious mind that we weren't aware of, and the idea was that they manifested themselves in our sleep. And if we used what's known as a dream dictionary, we could kind of get the meaning, the hidden meaning behind those dreams. And so this was the whole idea of the manifest content and latent content in our dreams, which you will need to know the difference. So let's say that I have a dream that I'm being chased down the hallway by an elephant. That dream, what I actually saw being chased down a hallway by an elephant, is what we call the manifest content. It's what manifested itself in my brain while I was sleeping. It's what manifested itself in my dream. It's what I actually saw. What that means, though, would then be the latent content. So let's say that, I go into a dream dictionary and it says, if you're dreaming about running down a hallway, that hallway is significant of your lifespan. So you feel like you're being chased through your life. Maybe you feel like things are going too fast in your life right now. And then an elephant symbolizes knowledge and wisdom. So, you feel like all this new information and knowledge and wisdom, is sending you too quickly through life, like it's going too fast. That would be the latent content. This is what Freud believed, and he would have people, sit down and say, okay, well, what did you dream about last night? and then they would talk through it and try to figure out, okay, what does this mean? What is the meaning behind these dreams? And there isn't much kind of scientific evidence behind this. This is kind of a pseudoscience where, certain symbols and meanings in dreams could mean something completely different to someone else. So again, I said, a hallway and an elephant. Let's say, someone who works every single day at a zoo has a dream about an elephant. For them, it might just be, I see elephants all the time. An elephant doesn't really mean much. Whereas for someone that isn't around an elephant that much, having a dream about it, maybe it is more symbolic. But because it's so subjective, because, the use of dream dictionaries and understanding what dreams mean is so different from person to person, and it can be interpreted in so many different ways, it is kind of a pseudoscience. But it is a way of trying to explain, why we have these dreams. Is it our unconscious mind trying to communicate with us? Another idea, or theory I should say, for why we dream is the activation synthesis hypothesis. And this is the whole idea that when we look at our brains when we're dreaming, we see that there's all this activation going on in our brains. So our brain is firing randomly in different areas. And so the whole idea is that, like, your brain is doing this, maybe it's just, it's working to consolidate those memories. Maybe, your brain is just resetting itself, similar to what I said earlier. The whole idea is that this random activation, your brain is then trying to make sense of it. And so it synthesizes, it connects all of that random firing, and then that forms these kind of visual, auditory, dreams that we have while we're sleeping. So it's the attempt to make sense of the random firing of brain cells during REM sleep. So you see more of that firing during REM sleep. So the whole idea is your brain is just making sense of it, and so it formulates into this weird dream. And then, people are imposing meaning on this random mental activity. It's why sometimes when we have dreams, especially dreams and vivid dreams in REM, it's why we have dreams that seem to make no sense. Like, who you are and what's going on changes so much. Like, you could be one person at one moment in, swimming in a pool, and then the next moment you're in a building and you're a completely different person. So that happens to a lot of people when they have dreams. And so the whole idea is, it's just your brain going through stuff. Some of the idea playing off of this is that random firing is it's going through things that went through your head throughout the day, that memory consolidation. And that's why sometimes, like, I've had a dream, before where there was a dolphin. And I wake up and I'm like, oh, that's right, yesterday I was talking to someone about dolphins. And then I had a dream about dolphins. Oh, that makes sense. But, like, who I was and what was going on was changing all over the place. Like, I was with a dolphin, then all of a sudden I was at a school. It's like, oh yeah, but I was also at a school yesterday. And so it's kind of synthesizing, again, it's bringing together all that random firing and trying to make sense of it kind of in our minds, and so it becomes this dream. It kind of strings it all together. But again, it's just a theory. It's a hard thing to test for sure, because we don't have a way of just, plugging into someone's brain and seeing exactly what they're seeing. But those are some of the interpretations, some of the theories as to why we dream. And it's why this part of psychology is so fascinating, because again, we don't know for sure. It's still just theories, because we don't have the technology quite yet to fully test it. But that's kind of what's so exciting about this field of psychology, is discovering just why we dream. Now, another interesting part about dreaming is this idea of lucid dreaming. And to be lucid, when you say, someone's being very lucid, it means that you're aware. You're very alert, aware of your surroundings, that person's speaking in a lucid way. And so what we mean by lucid dreams is it's when you become aware to the fact that you're dreaming. And this is really interesting, and there's certain tips and tricks, and you can see more on page 145 for the book that's associated with this class that talks about it in more detail, but it's a really interesting feeling. Because it'll feel like reality, like you can feel every sense, you can feel the brush of wind on your face, excuse me, but you know that you're dreaming. And especially in lucid dreaming, when you become aware that you're dreaming, you then gain control of that dream. And so there's been an instance where I had a lucid dream, and I realized that it was a dream, and so I made myself sprout wings, and I was able to fly. And it felt like I was really flying. Again, you could feel the brush of breezes, you could feel changes in temperature, you could feel like the movement of wings on my back. It was really an amazing feeling to get to experience. And there's all sorts of tips and tricks as to making it more likely for you to have a lucid dream. The way that's worked for me is there's something known as a reality check, where essentially you just have some sort of a repetitive, like, movement that you do or a thing that you check. Like I did it for excuse me. I did it for a while on my phone, where the background of my phone just asked the question, "Are you dreaming?" And then I would ask myself, and that's a reality check, I would say, okay, am I dreaming? I'd ask myself, I'd look around and say, no, I'm not. Excuse me. The idea is that if you have that repetitive motion, every time you open up and check your phone, you ask yourself, oh, am I, dreaming, which is that reality check. The idea is that you are more likely to do that same motion and ask that same question while you're sleeping. Again, it goes back to that whole idea of memory consolidation. Because if you are able to get to the point where you are asking yourself in a dream, am I dreaming? You are far more likely to suddenly realize, oh, yes, I am. Excuse me. And so that's just one of the tips and tricks. There's certain objects, there's certain things you can do right before you fall asleep. But the idea is that lucid dreaming is when you become aware to the fact that you are dreaming. So instead of now talking about dreaming, we're going to talk more about, again, sleep in general and various disorders that can happen. Because there's a lot. There is one sleep disorder that pretty much 100% of individuals will experience at some point in their life, and that's insomnia. But we're going to talk about other ones as well. But insomnia is this inability, it's either to fall asleep, to stay asleep, or, not feeling tired sort of thing, but staying asleep, falling asleep, and returning to sleep. So, when you wake up in the middle of the night, being able to fall back asleep. And as I've mentioned, pretty much everyone, if not everyone, will experience this to some capacity at some point in their life. For some people, it's lifelong, and the use of medication or, melatonin, things like that help. For other people, it's just something you experience, during a very stressful time in your life, and then it goes away. It's different for everyone. But what we categorize that disability of being unable to fall asleep, stay asleep, or return to sleep, we call insomnia. There's also something known as narcolepsy, and this is when people just kind of, in a sense, randomly fall asleep. Or they have these sleep attacks, as they're called. It should be noted, though, that for narcolepsy, there's a common misconception that it really is just randomly, like the person will be in the moment of, just talking to everyone, and then they'll, just fall asleep. It's not quite like that. It's more in moments of kind of arousal that bring about these sleep attacks. So if someone gets really excited or really angry or really sad, it seems that is more likely to bring upon a sleep attack. This is very similar. What I talk about is fainting goats, if people have ever heard about them. A lot of people think that fainting goats, when you spook them, they go all rigid and they faint. They aren't actually fainting. What's happening is it's a rare kind of disorder, and when they are excited in any way, it causes their muscles to go stiff. And then usually, since they're in the middle of walking or doing something, because they go rigid, it makes them fall over, which gives the appearance of fainting. It's a kind of similar thing with narcolepsy, where it's that excitement that then brings about those sleep attacks, where they go immediately into REM sleep. So it's not like stage 1 or stage 2, it goes immediately into REM sleep. And that's what we mean by narcolepsy. And there will be videos that will be linked in the bottom that show an example of a dog, a little puppy. Actually, there'll be 2 different videos of dogs that have narcolepsy, so it kind of shows an example of what it's like. Another thing is sleep apnea. Sleep apnea it seems very serious and it is bad for your health, but it's not as alarming as it may sound, which I'll explain in more detail in a moment. But sleep apnea is when a person is sleeping and kind of the muscles on their throat kind of relax too much. And what happens is it blocks the airwaves, and so the person essentially stops breathing while they're asleep. Luckily, though, our brains are very smart, and when it realizes that, the brain is being starved of oxygen, it wakes up the person just enough for them to gasp for some air, get some good oxygen going, and then it goes back into sleep, where unfortunately then, they're starved of oxygen again. They stop breathing. And so this happens hundreds, if not thousands of times all night long, where the individual, they fall asleep, they stop breathing, they wake up just a little bit, gasp for some air, fall back asleep. A lot of times they don't realize that they're waking up, because it's just waking up the body enough to be aware of the surroundings to get that oxygen. So usually it's not fully aware before going back to sleep. And again, in a sense, suffocating. A person cannot die from suffocation from the sleep disorder, it should be noted, and that's why I say it's not as scary as it sounds. But the whole action of constantly waking up and falling asleep and waking up and falling asleep is not healthy, and it can cause a lot of issues. Another thing, it's found that it's more often to occur in middle-aged to older adults, as well as those that are obese or kind of overweight, because there is just that more pressure on the throat automatically. But ultimately what it is just the throat kind of closing up while you're sleeping. And there are machines out there. There's medication, but there's also machines known as a CPAP that goes over the face and essentially just gives the person a constant stream of oxygen while they're sleeping so the throat doesn't close up. So there is stuff out there. I should also say that there is medication for narcolepsy, where it's essentially giving them, it's like, almost being put on like speed or something, and like really keeps them awake. So even if they have that moment of excitement, it isn't enough to knock them out. So there is medication for a lot of these sleep disorders. Some other ones, nightmare disorder, or just having nightmares. This is when people have kind of disturbing sleep during REM sleep. So again, during REM sleep, you have the most vivid dreams. If those vivids are kind of negative or scary, you consider that a nightmare. And if you have those, kind of every time you go to bed, it might be a nightmare disorder. And it's not a fun thing to experience, but there's kind of no harm to it other than, it's not a fun thing to experience nightmares. It's also more prone in children than it is in adults. So you see a lot more children having nightmares than adults, kind of more regularly, I should say. Next thing is sleep terror disorder. This is a little different, where it's kind of like having nightmares, but more extreme. Like they're just absolutely terrifying. But it should be mentioned that it happens during the deeper levels of sleep. So this is more like the stages 3 and 4 of sleep, where the person is really knocked out. But also, if you recall, their body's not paralyzed. And so sometimes when people are experiencing sleep terrors, you'll see them thrash out and they'll start screaming. And, they might even get up and, try to run. And it looks terrifying because the person sounds like they are terrified because in that moment they are terrified. But oftentimes the person doesn't even remember that they had this episode. So usually very little about the night terror is remembered. So a lot of times, and again, you see this happening more in children than adults, a lot of times it's more stressful for the parents than for the children. Because, the parents are woken up to their children screaming and crying and thrashing about, absolutely terrified. But by the time the child wakes up, they won't even remember that it happened. So a lot of times it's just more terrifying for the adults or the people around. And then the last one we're going to talk about is sleepwalking. And this is kind of similar to night terrors in that it is dreaming that's happening outside of REM, so when your body is not paralyzed. The only thing is it's, just a regular kind of dream, and the person acts it out. Now, I've mentioned that vivid dreams tend to happen in REM sleep. Dreams that happen outside of REM sleep are kind of these mundane, normal, everyday kind of dreams. And what I mean by that is if you've ever had a dream where, your alarm gets off, you wake up, you're getting ready for bed, you wash your face, you brush your teeth, you get all dressed, you head out the door, and then your alarm goes off and you wake up. It's a dream that seems very much like just a daily routine. And so when people have these dreams and start acting them out, they might engage in sleepwalking. And so they're kind of just going about their daily routine, you know, walking around, carrying on with a conversation with someone, but they're asleep. And there's been some thoughts out there where they say, you know, don't disturb someone, you know, that's sleepwalking, or they might attack you and go violent. That's not true. They might be a little confused and stuff. Kind of the best thing to do is just kind of slowly kind of get them back to their bed and back to sleeping. That's the best thing. You don't have to wake them up, but you should be keeping an eye on them, make sure that they're being safe. There's also something similar to this known as sleep eating. So there's sleep talking, there's sleep eating, there's sleep walking. With sleep eating, this is when an individual will, a lot of times they'll, in their sleep, go down, go into their kitchen, raid their fridge. Then the next day, have no idea that they did it. And sometimes people that engage in sleep eating will eat some pretty bizarre stuff, like they'll take an entire jar of mayonnaise and just in their sleep be eating pure mayonnaise. There's also some videos on YouTube of that show people being recorded during sleep eating or sleepwalking, which I might put in the bottom as well. When we talk about sleep, and also what the healthy amount is, usually what we hear is 8 hours. You know, 8 hours is the perfect amount. But that's not necessarily true. It actually varies by age. And so obviously when you're younger, and the body is growing so much, it needs a lot of time, you know, especially with all that new information stuff, it needs time to heal, recover, you know, grow. And so you need way more sleep when you're younger. So newborns, it's almost all day, 14 to 17 hours recommended. Infants, toddlers, you know, still over 10 hours, even preschoolers, 10 to 13 hours. And then as you'll see, the trend is, as time goes on and as we get older, we need less and less sleep. And then when you get to essentially older adults, it's about the 7 to 8, whereas for you all, you know, well, teens a little bit more, but adults, 7 to 9. One thing I should say, though, is it really is different for everybody. What you should go by is what feels good for you. Because there are some individuals where they'll get a full 8 hours and they'll wake up and they'll feel really, really tired. But, you know, they go to bed, they get, you know, 6, 7 hours, they wake up and they feel really refreshed. It's essentially to go with whatever your rhythm is. You know, what your stages of going into REM sleep and then back out and all of that. There's kind of this cycle that's on average about 8 hours, but again, it's different for everyone. And it's finding the perfect amount for you that helps to aid with getting that most restful amount of sleep. And so that's it for sleep and dreaming. We're going to come back and talk a little bit now about altered states of consciousness. Because all that we've talked about now are kind of more natural things that happen during both our wakefulness and then our sleeping, but there's different states of awareness that are sometimes aided through things like hypnosis, medication, and then drugs.